afternoon, everyone. This is Bob Celeste, and welcome to Open Mic Friday, where we have weekly discussions with interesting people doing interesting things. And support for today's program comes from Calculogic, and you can learn about Calculogic's machine learning and analytics services on the Open Mic Friday website. All lines are muted right now. However, you do have the capability to raise your hand if you're on if you're on the call today, or ask a question, and I'll read the question back. But it would be nicer if we could just connect you to our guests, and we could have a conversation going back and forth. Speaking about our guest, Dr. Mary Lacity joins us to discuss the current state of blockchain enterprise technologies and the value they promise to deliver. Mary, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bob, and hello everybody out there. So I'm told we have guests as far away as New Zealand and Ireland.
We're a global group here.
Yes.
So Mary, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your position and what you're doing at the center.
Sure. So, welcome to the wonderful state of Arkansas. I'm the director of the Blockchain Center of Excellence here. And actually, I'm going to have you pop up the Blockchain Center of Excellence slide.
Sure.
That'll help the group know what we could do. So it's been a very interesting journey. I'm actually new to the position, new to the university. I'd spent the first 26 years of my career studying the sourcing of information technology and business services. And back in, I'm going to say it was about May of 2016, I'm sitting there with the CEO of Ascension Health Ministries. And Bobby says to me, "Oh, Mary, what do you think of blockchains?" And I said, "What's a blockchain?" So like any good academic, it's May, I have summer off. So I called my department chair and I said, "Dinesh, I don't know anything about blockchains. Can I teach it in the fall?" So I started going on a big journey of studying first Bitcoin and Ethereum, how most people get into the space. And then in 2017, I went to MIT CISR, the Center of Information Systems Research there, where I led a project looking at 30 companies and their adoption cycles of blockchains for enterprises. That resulted in a book that you see on the cover slide here. That was written last year in 2018, and today I'm going to give you some of the updates from the status from 2018 to 2019. If you just flip one slide, people be patient with me, I have to do this for my dean. I just want to tell you a little bit more about the Blockchain Center of Excellence. So we were officially launched here by our wonderful state governor, Asa Hutchinson, who gave us our seed money. And we have a phenomenal executive advisory board. So we have ArcBest Technologies, you can see the logos over here, FIS, IBM, JB Hunt, McKesson, Microsoft, Tyson, and Walmart. They are very, very close to the Center of Excellence. They help guide our curriculum. We hold bi-monthly workshops. I know some of the people, I see you out there, Scott Mooney from McKesson. You were at our last executive advisory board workshop. And as a teacher, I'm very passionate about building these blockchain capabilities for our students. And what you're looking at right here, I love this picture, is we brought 10 of our students who were working on a use case for our governor. And he asked our students, can you look at birth certificates as a blockchain use case? And so our students went even beyond that, looking at citizen identity. And then we got to go to the governor's, we went to the state capitol in December to present him with their proof of concept, and he has authorized additional development of that. So we're really excited about the things we're doing here in the Center of Excellence. And for everybody on the call, if you're willing to come to Fayetteville, Arkansas, we on March 29th have a Blockchain for Business conference. We can accommodate 300 executives. We got phenomenal keynote speakers, like including the governor. We have Frank Yanis, who was leading the IBM Food Trust Initiative at Walmart, who's left to go to the FDA. We have Colonel James Regener, who started a VC company for blockchains, a startup, and was developing applications for Moog aircraft. And we've got 15 other vertical industry sessions. So if your group is interested, when you send out the recording, I can send out a link to our conference. All right, was that enough selling?
That was good. I like the sign behind you too.
Okay. Yes. Welcome.
Great. So, did you want to go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about what you're working on? Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I always like one picture to show, to kind of tell a big story. So one of the things I've been trying to do is really trace all of the major activities that are happening in the entire blockchain space. And this gets represented on this one slide. So most of us get a lot of visibility to the cryptocurrency market. And so you can see arrows that are either red or green. Well, actually, there's only one red arrow. And I just want to kind of say what's happening in the broader landscape, because you hear a lot of negative stuff because of that one red arrow with the showing the value of the cryptocurrencies going down. And so I think it's masking all of the progress that we're making in enterprise blockchains. So the space I'm really more interested in is the smaller circle over here that you see in kind of the investment and services market. So how are companies investing in blockchain initiatives, including corporate investment, VC investment, initial coin offering, and is particularly the professional services market. So these are the companies like our IBMs and our Microsofts and our KPMGs and our Accentures that are helping their clients explore blockchain use cases and participating in things like helping them with their ecosystems. Good news on blockchain startups, because I think that some of them are going to completely deliver on the promise of the social missions that we have in blockchains in general. About over 3,000 startups now that are blockchain based. Their average valuation is $4.5 million. So I think, Bob, that's pretty significant.
It is.
And yeah, and I think a lot for the enterprises out there, I'd be really interested to know what some of your group is doing. The blockchain working groups, so these are the Hyperledger Project, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, your own group, Bob, the Center for Supply Chain Studies, the R3s of the world, the B3Is. We see a lot of activity in consortia trying to explore use cases and develop applications. And we see a lot of activity that continues in that. We can talk about how well these, do you want to talk about that now or?
No, go ahead. You can finish this and we'll come
Okay.
back.
Well, yeah. This is going to be, I have a couple of sound bites that I think that are important. So I think a lot of people look at when people leave the consortium like it's big news and things are failing, and that's not what we're finding in our research. What we're finding is that initially when companies get into this space, they don't know where to go, so they go many places. They join many consortia. And then when they start to really learn the capabilities and they can focus on what they really want to do and which ecosystem they really want to be. And so the activities seem to that like they're participating less, but it's not true. They're just participating more deeply in fewer consortia. Blockchain patents are also a good indicant of the size of the market. And last year they had a record of over 1,200 patents. I'm going to give you a quiz, Bob. I don't think we talked about this. Do you know which company holds the most patents for blockchains?
Which company?
Yeah, which company has the most blockchain patents?
Well, I think my first thought would be go to the technical folks like the IBMs of the world.
Oh, you're so good. Yeah, they have the second most number of patents. The first one is actually Bank of America. We saw financial services really jumped in this space early because they were the first ones to look at Bitcoin as both an opportunity and a threat to financial services. And I think MasterCard holds the third largest number of patents. So that's an interesting space to watch. All right, now that last part of the landscape, people, I'm no expert, so I just put a big question mark because the regulations in this space are so confusing. You hear one announcement and it has a huge ripple effect on the cryptocurrency market that day. So I'm not an expert on the regulation space. So all you people out there, don't ask me regulation questions. I'm as confused as the rest of you.
Yeah, we've actually in our consortium or studies have actually heard a little bit about concerns about GDPR and privacy regulations and how that affects when data is distributed around the world and isn't really contained in one geographic place.
Absolutely, and we'll talk a little bit more about those challenges when we get to our big challenge slide.
Okay.
Okay, so that's all I was going to say is that most indicators still show that the blockchain landscape is growing, not shrinking. It's just the cryptocurrency market gives everybody the impression of that because the value of the coins have gone down so so immensely since December 2017.
Yeah, I think it's almost a misnomer to call those cryptocurrencies. I mean, a currency that fluctuates so much in price really is I don't know whether you consider a crypto Ponzi scheme or a crypto investment, but it'll be nice to see if we actually get real stable currencies that could be depended on.
Yeah, and we're kind of lumped. I think there's something like over 2,500 cryptocurrencies you can buy and sell today. And we tend to think of them all as currencies like Bitcoin, using them as a store of value or as a medium of exchange. But many more of them are more like utility tokens that help operate the functionality of a blockchain application. Last year, we saw the rise of stable coins that try to peg a coin to something real in the world, like, one coin equals $1 or one coin equals 1 gram of gold, to try to address some of this volatility that we see in the broader market.
Makes sense. Do you want me to go to the next?
Sure. Okay, this is one of the first slides that I like to put up whenever I talk about the current state of enterprise blockchains, because when we talk about all of the challenges and the problems and things are so much slower than we thought they were going to be and people are kind of getting fed up, I always come back to the pot of gold at the end of the blockchain rainbow. I really believe there is trillions of dollars out there in potential business value that we can unlock or create new business value with a completely distributed model like a blockchain application affords, compared to our current centralized command and control applications of today. So I am an IS professor, so the underlying architecture of this is immensely promising and interesting to me. But from the business perspective, all of these first things that we see being, the value that gets unlocked when parties can transact directly, when we have one version of the truth that we don't have to deal with reconciliations, the ability to do track and trace, particularly through supply chains, is a tremendous business value that's promised. The ability to automatically execute agreements through smart contracts. Wow, that is a huge game changer there. The fact that we can do things without relying on trusted third parties or relying on them less means that we can unlock a lot of transaction costs. And then from the security perspective, when you talk about all of these independent nodes operating, we end up with a security that is more fault tolerant, more resilient, and always available. So that's a big chunk of business value. Then the promised social value, especially this is what our students are really interested in. How can they change the world? They're really interested in things like inclusion. How can we use blockchain-based applications to bring 2 billion of the people on the planet that are unbanked and bringing them financial services, tracking refugees? I mean, there's so much on the inclusion side that our students are excited about. And then us as citizens, wouldn't it be cool if we controlled our own identity rather than our states and our governments? So this idea of self-sovereignty over our own data, whether it's our identity, our citizenship, our own medical records, and just the empowerment. I mean, I think one of the ideas that I find very exciting is if you look at Google, for example, today, I think it's something like 95% of their revenues come from advertising. What if we as citizens got paid for our eyeballs on the screen rather than paying it to a trusted third party? So there's all this social value that can be unlocked also with blockchains. So keep this big pot of gold in mind as you guys are going through your use cases, getting frustrated with the governance, getting frustrated with IP, getting frustrated with privacy. You have to keep coming back to the fact that there is a potential huge amount of value that you can get.
So Mary, do you see this as sort of a mind shift in how companies would co-create connections and applications versus today where, I've got my data, you've got yours, we share a little bit, and then we bicker over what really happened?
Yes. So on the one hand, the senior management gets really excited at this promised business value, but then when they dig deeper and understand the implications of that, then also it's like, whoa, slow down here. we got big issues to overcome. So on the one hand, they love this idea of getting rid of trusted third parties, and then on the other hand, what it actually means is you don't have complete control over the application. So then you start to get in discussions of shared governance. Who makes these decisions? What if there's a mistake? When do we roll something back? Who's deciding this? Who are the people that are going to do the validating? I might be happy with who you pick today. What if I don't like if you switch validators in the future? So there's, I think the management challenges are the ones I'm very interested in, but I think we're going to get there, again, because there's too much promised business value to just walk away from this.
Do you think that we might see the emergence of shared governance models that could be used as templates rather than having to recreate how things are managed and shared in the future?
Oh yeah, we're definitely, right now the main governance model that we kind of look at is how open source communities are run, but that's going to be very difficult. You know, the number of people that participate in an open source community is going to be very hard for an enterprise blockchain application. I think it's going to be more like you're going to have the core finders or founders of an ecosystem, and then they're going to have to figure out a way to incentivize the additional participants, and they're going to have to give them enough value that they're going to be able to accept the governance model that the initial ecosystem developed.
That makes sense, because you certainly couldn't rewrite that every time someone was to join a consortium or something like that and have to renegotiate everything with everyone.
Yeah, and the other thing is people like to romanticize how an open source community works. If you listen to the chatter that happens with the Bitcoin core team or the Ethereum team, oh my God, it's like, it's huge. I mean, it's you know, I just can't see enterprises wanting to have that kind of governance model.
Interesting. Okay, should I go over to the next slide?
Sure. So I think the next slide that we have here is sort of all of these are the proof of concepts that I've been kind of tracking. So a lot of these came through news feeds. I mean, I'm sure all of us out there have things like Google Alerts. I read the MIT has a newsletter they publish every week, the Coinbase. So I'm just tracking these and putting them in different buckets of industries. And when you look at this, it's pretty immense and impressive. And a couple points I want to make. One is that we see blockchain use cases across all industries. So this isn't just a one-trick pony here. People tended to think, oh, is this only going to affect financial services? I think it has the potential to affect every single industry out there. We also see governments participating and doing a lot, and it's a global phenomenon. I mean, we tend to focus more on the US, but this is happening across the world. And these, again, are proof of concepts that happen in sandboxes. So another thing that I think people are getting frustrated with is 90% of these, Bob, will never leave the sandbox. So people say, oh my God, that means you have a 90% failure rate. But our message is not that. Our message is this is typical of the early days of exploring. So we're finding in some companies, like a good example is a large global automotive company. They went through 9 proof of concepts and realized, 7 of these are not really blockchain use cases. Right? They're better served and being addressed with the technologies that we already have today. And only 2 of them are true blockchain use cases. And they learned a lot through that effort. So just because you're going to hear of a lot of POCs that don't move into further development, I think that's just typical and fine. Another shout out I'm going to give, I really like Saurabh Gupta from HFS Consulting Group. He does a lot of good research in this space, and he just published a report that was based on over 500 blockchain use cases, and he found that this year, 10% of them, the organizations have plans to move them to the next stage of development, and that was significant over the findings he did last year, where only 5% of the POCs were going to move to production. So again, that's sort of indicating that the enterprises are funneling and starting to understand which of these use cases are really worthy of getting that business value and worth all the aggravation that you're going to have to go through to get there, and which of them are better served with existing technologies.
So 10% out of any R&D funnel is a pretty high number. That's significant.
Well, I guess yes, with the world you're used to, yes, like pharmaceuticals. Right?
Yeah. And so is there emerging, I know on a previous call we had sort of where someone had started to put together sort of the rubric, if you will, of you put your blockchain project coin inside and it rolls down a if then else statement to find out whether this is a blockchain app or not. Are we getting better at at identifying the kinds of projects that might be, and I'll just quote somebody that's on one of my calls all the time, blockchainified?
Blockchainified. Well, I think the basic, the decision-making framework really hasn't changed. I mean, do you have multiple parties across trust lines that need to transact? I think the initial funnels are all solid. The question and the real thing is whether it isn't that if then else funnel is, can you build the ecosystem? Can you bring the people outside of the walls of the firm to the table? And can you provide value for all of those participants so that you can deliver something? So to me, the bigger challenges are really the ecosystem and the shared governance models, not the if then else. We know, if you have a trusted third party that sits in the middle of the transactions that cost too much, is inefficient or ineffective. Yes, then create a blockchain. I think that still holds up. But the next questions is, how do you jumpstart this? Who do we bring to the table? How are we going to figure out how to fund this? How are we going to figure out our intellectual property? Those questions are still, answers to those questions are still evolving.
Yeah, and even I know that sometimes from a financial standpoint, a trusted third party, to your point, could be more expensive, but the real risk of what happens when things go bad, who do our lawyers go after?
Yeah, who's picking up the phone?
Yeah, if we take them out, then there's only us.
Right, exactly. I like my MasterCard and Visa, right? If there's fraud on my card, they bear that risk. So your risk profiles change in a blockchain application. And so it's all the stuff outside the actual technology that defines whether you're going to have a viable use case or not. I think companies pretty early on figured out the very narrow if then else decision making. Is this a blockchain use case?
Well, looking at this list, it's really interesting how much creativity is going on in these different industries.
Oh yeah.
If you're in any industry, you hear about the ones that are close to you and those kind of things. But this is a huge list here with a lot of different things that you wouldn't even necessarily think someone would even be thinking about.
Yeah, we're working with a company here at the center called Identify, and they're working on a smart resume project, which is really exciting because, think of all you companies out there have to hire. And just looking at a LinkedIn profile or somebody's CV, how do you know they really got a degree from the University of Arkansas? And so they're building certificates that like the University of Arkansas will certify, yes, these are our graduates, and those would go on a blockchain application that only our university can authorize whether somebody has a degree from here. So there's lots of different kinds of fun models that are coming out there. It's like Candyland for a professor.
So we're about to go on to another slide that we've seen in many different ways, and is always interesting as far as any kind of technology or new ideas. And here we are at the Gartner Hype Cycle.
Yeah, so I saw last week your guest had also put up the Gartner Hype Cycle. And one of the things I always do is I don't have the money to pay for Gartner, so I have to wait until it's in public view. But every July they put this out in the public, and I kept waiting. July 2017, they had placed blockchains right over the peak of inflated expectations and heading towards the trough of disillusionment. And in 2018, I kept saying, where are they going to put it? Where are they going to put it? And they didn't move it. Like it hadn't gone anywhere. Really? But I want to show you the next slide because this is something else Gartner recently put out. That they have really slowed when we're going to hit that trough of disillusionment. And so I know this from some of our advisory board members that they've been talking to Gartner that, we believe in it. We believe that we're going to get the business value, but it's going to take us longer. It's not just, this is a technology that you don't wrap around within the boundaries of a firm. It's cross firms, so it's going to take longer. So now they've pushed that we won't even get to the worst, the trough of illusionment until 2021, and then we'll start to see a rise into the slope of enlightenment after that. So again, my big message today for those of you out there, I know many of you are probably frustrated that this is taking longer. Keep your eye on the big prize of the business and social value that the technology will evolve and mature, and the models to make this work for you as businesses are also going to mature, and you're going to be some of the ones that help identify which ones will actually work.
I guess also whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, when you think about the trough of disillusionment, me, the glass is always half full. So I'm thinking, let's get through that thing really fast so we can get to the good stuff.
Right. Let's fail fast. Right. You
Yeah,
hear that?
right.
Let's fail fast.
But this is interesting. I mean, this actually lays out a plan for what happens as you go through that and come out of it. Because the other diagram, it doesn't really, it kind of insinuates that you're going maybe coming out of it, but you may actually go through the bottom sometimes and never come out. But this is, I think, is a positive way of looking at it, that we, as with a lot of technologies, we're going to come out maybe a little thinner than we thought, but there's going to be value at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and someday we're not going to need a blockchain center of excellence, right? Someday these technologies eventually become institutionalized. So, you know, in the early days, we in academics would have things called like a center of excellence to use what we call end user computing tools, like essentially Microsoft Word, Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints. You know, we don't have those anymore. They just become part of the fabric, our IT fabric. And so eventually, you know, I'll be out of a job too.
You'll be on to a different center.
Oh yeah, I'll be on to the next obsession I have.
I'm going to flip forward here.
All right, now this is where I empathize with all of you out there. So this chart was based with all of our interviews that we've done with you, just like you senior executives out there that are struggling with things. And in our interviews, we asked, what are the challenges to actually deploying, right? And so I've kind of created these different buckets, and some you have control over and some you don't. So the first bucket I have there is, in academics, we call it the IT artifact, but for you guys, I just called it the IT platform. So you have to keep in mind that these technologies are still immature, right? So they, you know, things like scalability and performance, they're going to get better, right? But just like any new technology, that they're not great yet. They're hard to use. We don't have a lot of developer tools. So, you know, how many Go programmers out there do you know? So there's a lot of technical challenges to it. I just wanted to mention interoperability, because that is one of the topics that we're tackling at the Blockchain Center of Excellence. So our executive advisory board is very, very concerned about interoperability. And from their business perspective, that translates into which horse do I bet on? So if I commit to this particular blockchain application and this ecosystem, and I decide there's something better out there, what happens to my data and my transactions? How easy is it to switch? And they're very concerned about lock-in. So that's their business perspective. From a technical perspective, we've looked in the center, we've got like 30 different technical projects that are out there. You can think of things like Quilt and Polkadot, Interledger. So at a technical level, there's a whole set of groups working on interoperability at that lower level. And then from a business perspective, people are worried about things like, what happens to my data, and what if I need to connect to more than one blockchains, and how do I do traceability of an item if there's more than one blockchain involved? And those are the kinds of issues and questions that they're asking.
And so that's kind of interesting that you have many different programs going and kind of looking into these things. How do you publish that information? I know it's because the people are looking at things and we're reading a lot of brochureware, versus having an organization that's gone under the covers, done some exploration, is able to say, this is what we found.
Okay, well, one of my jobs is to create a white paper series for the Blockchain Center of Excellence. I'm working on the one for interoperability right now. And our member firms get to sequester it for 60 days, but eventually it will be out there on our Blockchain Center of Excellence website.
Interesting, that's great. One of the things that came up on one of our calls recently was when we talked about interoperability, for example. Our traditional way of becoming interoperable is by creating a messaging standard. So we don't really necessarily interoperate on the business logic or what the program is doing, but at least we can try to standardize that message that's moving back and forth. But the greater issue is to be able to standardize on the rule set that everybody is working against.
Right. I mean, you're right. There's different levels of interoperability, and there's contributions to be made in all those places. I know you have GS1 on the call, And I can tell you a lot of the enterprises are really relying on standards groups like GS1 to help enable this. That kind of moves us over to our data standard bucket of challenges. Right? So we know data standards are a big one. And sort of like if we go back, everyone says, oh, well, we have EDI, so don't we, doesn't that solve the problem? Well, I think that the real challenge that people want to get to is how most people have implemented EDI is still they do forward and backward mapping. So my first job was actually at Exxon, and we did just that when we were developing EDI standards for joint interest billing. Everybody agreed to the standard, but nobody really changed their back end. They just kept doing forward and backwards mapping. We might still be doing that if you're just connecting your enterprise system to a new blockchain application, but that's not necessarily going to get us when you're trying to deal with multiple blockchain applications. So I think you're right. We're going to have to create standardized business rules, standardized smart contracts, in addition to standardized data formats.
I think that's really important for the, I don't want to be generational, but as the new generation starts to think about this, to realize that, it took me 10, 20 years to realize that standards actually exist in the world. And then I started being enlightened as to how valuable they are. But being able to leverage that, which has already been standardized in this kind of new environment, would be really kind of an interesting thing to work through.
And I think the other thing we're seeing is everything's kind of co-evolving. So you have the technologies evolving, you've got the use cases and the business application consortia evolving, and the standards groups are evolving too. So we've got like IEEE and ISO, all of them are trying to tackle the blockchain landscape as well. And so it's like trying to move things in concert is a big challenge. The other thing I think is really interesting, and Bob, I want to ask if you're experiencing this too. It seems like in consortia, at the early days when you're doing a design, there's a lot of data that gets planned to be put on the shared digital ledger. And as you go through the consortium experience, it seems like that ledger gets smaller and smaller and smaller as to what's actually going to be going on it. You run 3 consortia. What do you think? What are you seeing?
It's exactly that. And as a matter of fact, when we started looking at blockchain, we knew this would not work, but we just wanted to do it, just have a baseline to say, what if we just threw everything up in the blockchain? And there's a lot of reasons you don't want to do that from a technical point of view, but when we ran the simulations and we looked at the data, then people started seeing, oh, you may have meant to put this data out there, but by me looking at this data across a large amount of time, I could start to make some calculations on where you are from a business standpoint, from an inventory standpoint, things like that. And so people, right, and you start to walk that data back into your environment, or you start to protect it in ways that it now becomes of no value because you can't search across it. So we start to have now discussions around, so what kind of metadata might we make available, at least just for searching, not really looking at the real data, but what kind of metadata, and what happens if you even say that there is metadata about something. So very knotty issues, but to your point, less and less data being exposed.
Yeah, transparency is always an issue. On the one hand, everybody wants everybody else to be transparent, but they don't want to be transparent themselves, right?
That's true.
Okay, and then moving over to the strategy and management one, you'll notice that I put competing priorities up there at the top, because one of the things that I think is really interesting is think about, and you can see this being traced on analyst calls, like people track what words are said on analyst calls. So in 2017, we saw lots of analysts hearing things from enterprises, senior management, talking about we're exploring blockchains. That language has shifted to digital ledger technology, which makes sense, right? Which is more the permission blockchains. And then the last time I looked at this analysis, it was even less hits on this. So you're seeing, because they got other things they got to worry about. And if you look at innovation centers inside large companies, so these are the companies that are supposed to be doing the exploration of new technologies, they're being asked to look at machine learning, robotic process automation, augmented reality, blockchains. I mean, how much can one organization tackle in a year? So there are issues of when do you start to look at this and when does it percolate to the top of our priority list? So that's one point I don't hear being made very often that I think is very important. We're still hearing from enterprises. Yes, we see the promised business value, but we don't see the ROI. We have accountability for things like a return on our investments. Struggling with business models. How is this going to affect my current revenue model? And I think I want to make a point that I think is kind of interesting. When I first went to MIT, this is at the beginning of 2017, I kept hearing these large enterprises saying, we've learned the lessons from Clayton Christensen. We now know that if we don't disrupt ourselves, somebody else is going to do it for them. And I was so excited to hear that until I actually did the interviews. And really what people call disruption is not disruption at all. A lot of the enterprises were just making their current products and services a little bit more efficient with a blockchain design, but they weren't breaking their revenue models. They weren't going after low market customers. They were pretty much just trying to use this to incrementally improve what they were doing today. Where we truly see a lot of the disruptive business models coming, just as Clayton Christensen predicts, are either in startups or in spin-offs from traditional companies, because they don't have to be bound to the existing revenue model. So we see that kind of playing out, classic Clayton Christensen. And,
I think that makes sense. I mean, especially from the startup point of view, but the spinoffs is really interesting because usually that there's a certain amount of intellectual maturity that comes out of a spinoff where they know the environment and they know what they're going to go after, and they're able to kind of expand and to your point, not just put a veneer on something that's already there.
It's already
but maybe
there.
Change it. Yeah.
And we're not seeing that many spinoffs. I think the reality is when we have somebody who really has a vision inside a large organization, they make the circuit, speak at consensus, etc., and then they get frustrated and end up starting their own startup. So if you look through the number of people, if I was allowed to list who I actually interviewed that were in the large enterprises, I can't tell you how many of them have left and gone to do something in a startup. Just because they got frustrated with the pace, the lack of really resources and dedication. Senior management say they want to do it, but then the realities of it and the resourcing of it gets in the way, which brings us to that bullet of skills, okay, so the skills in the blockchain space. We're doing our part at the University of Arkansas. We've developed undergraduate and graduate curriculum. But right now we haven't scaled. We're only teaching like one sequence of a class. We need to hire more faculty that can teach this. So one of the things we're doing is at our major academic conferences, we're trying to train faculty to use Ethereum in the classroom, Hyperledger Fabric. So we're doing our best for skills. And the one thing we always parade to our students is if you go to Upwork, blockchains is now the #1 fastest growing skill sets that are in demand. So there's a huge shortage of skill sets out there. And that's another impediment to large-scale deployments. You need talent to do this.
So you're saying my COBOL skills aren't going to get me anywhere?
Well, I got COBOL skills too. Well, they're helpful because now you understand what an if, then, else, and loop are. So it's okay.
I'm marginally employable. That's good.
You became management, not labor, Bob.
So this area, the next area you're going to talk about, I think is really interesting as far as a lot of things that are taking place in the universe of blockchain and change here. This legal risk aspect of it.
Yeah, and this is the one I'm not the most intelligently able to speak to. I'm mostly just perplexed by it all. I've seen a couple things that I thought have been interesting. So one of the things people always say, code is not law. I'm sure you've heard that statement, right? Code is not law. But there was this was actually early, about 3 years ago, Barclays actually came up with an interesting POC where they said, how can we make code law? And so they developed contract templates. So like your user, filling in like a simple form. And if you're filling in a legal contract, underneath that, they were generating code that could be, that would create the smart contract. So we're seeing more kinds of activities like that. And I want you to share your story because you were telling me about a group that you know from Philadelphia working on this.
Yeah, it's called the Accord Project, and it's a number of attorneys, and they're actually going to be in the program in the next few weeks. And what's interesting, what they're doing is taking a look at contract, and certainly not taking a full English 80-page contract and trying to turn that into some code, But looking at it and saying, are there certain things that we normally represent in a written contract that we should represent in smart contracts? And to your point, template them, debug them, make sure they're working properly, and so they would become tools to anyone that's putting together a smart contract. There may be clauses that you would need to put in there, things like that. But they are looking further also about how to go, because we're doing that all today. We sign a contract between us, and then we walk that contract back to our IT departments and say, you have to change the program so it fits what we just agreed to. And so we're doing that, and we're making mistakes. We're making double amount of bugs in our systems, and now we have the opportunity to limit that to one. But that's a very interesting area to see whether we can actually get there. Can you have a negotiation that ends up into code? Because code is very binary, if you will, and contracts are sometimes a little gray.
I think I think the first step that's going to be with these smart contracts is you don't necessarily automatically execute, you just create triggers. Like, okay, we're going along, there's some Oracle or external information that says this contract has been violated, and you may not be switching money in and out of accounts right away. It might require an investigation. So I think that's going to be the way we're going to do it. And I told you my background was in outsourcing, and those contracts you couldn't just agree to them and put them in a drawer and forget about them. They were constantly being used as a reference document that had to be reinterpreted every time something new came up in service delivery or a change of character. So I don't think we live in a world where contracts can be completely codified and executed autonomously, except for things that have zero uncertainty, right? Things that you could only confidently create if-then-else statements for.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you always still want to have a second look before you commit to that clause.
Absolutely. You can disagree. I mean, you can sign a contract and each party thinks we have a common understanding, but you don't necessarily have a common understanding. That's why you have disputes and need to have discussions about it. Code is unequivocal. It will execute. So that's a huge leap.
Yeah, I think to your point before about the proposition that code might be connected in a smart contract to actual currency that would be transferred. I think your point was well taken, that we probably are not going to jump to that kind of environment, but more to one where you get an alert, where you get some sort of feed, and then you can trigger the payment in more of a traditional fashion.
Right. I mean, like we have a lot of our companies are in supply chain. So if you think about cold chain, so now you have a sensor that says you've dropped below the contractual amount. Well, how do you know the sensor didn't fail? I mean, it requires an investigation, not a transfer of dollars at that point.
Right. We have a couple of questions here. I'm going to bring them up for you. Okay. One, I think Charlotte, I think she's on the phone. I may not be able to open her up and let her talk, but I'll just read what she wrote.
Okay.
And maybe she said, are there any resources for high school students to help them begin to explore blockchain as they move through their education? So prep prior to going into college.
High school. Wow. This is only anecdotal, so I'm not saying this in any official capacity, but one of the things that was so fascinating to me was I have a 19-year-old son, and when he was in high school, some of his friends were actually mining Bitcoin. Right? So they know it before the IS professor knows it, right? So, it's an amazing, some students, when they get engaged in technology, they're amazing. They're not waiting for official curriculum. Now, I will tell you that I can't say this officially in the state of Arkansas. One of the things about our governor that I really treasure is he's really created a good computer science skills for all of our high school curriculum. So at least students are learning about computer programming as an entree in there, but I don't know of any official blockchain curriculum yet. I think one of the challenges that you have is you really have to understand business processes, and high school students really don't have a lot of base understanding of business processes, although they can grasp technology rather quickly.
Right. I'm going to bring Bill. Bill has more of a, he's got a Yeah, I see a phone icon here. I may not be able. Bill, are you on?
Take myself off my own mute here. Can you hear me?
There you are. Hi, Bill.
We can hear you.
Yeah, hi. Very interesting stuff. I guess I was in the process of typing in an actual question, but my first one was just a comment. I was at another conference, and there's a startup called Data Gumbo that works in oil and gas, and they've actually their presentation was about the smart contracts they were doing with one of their clients that are actually executing. It's based on work done on an oil rig, and when I guess certain documents are submitted, they would get pay automatically some bonus payments for performance. So I think there are, and the point tying back to your stuff is that they talked about how these were referenced in their actual legal agreements. So the legal agreements would reference a smart contract and somehow then make the smart contract a valid part of the legal agreement.
Interesting.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. I wrote that down. Data Gumbo.
Now, yeah. Now, while I've got you, I've also got a question here. We've done so. Just by way of background, I'm in the analyst at Chainlink Research, and we do a lot of work in multi-enterprise systems. We call it network SaaS. So these are companies like GT Nexus, One Network, E2Open is getting there, and some others that have shared data objects among multiple enterprises and also shared processes, and they've been at this for a couple of decades. So part of our contention is that there's a huge amount of work they had to do around building canonical data models to share data between each other, building security models, figuring out the right business model and participation and all of that. And it seems like they provide 95% of what blockchain promises to provide, and a lot of them are dabbling in blockchain as well. Have you looked at any of those sort of existing? And I'm not talking about EDI networks. I'm talking about the ones that actually have, shared purchase orders, objects, and shared processes, inter-enterprise process execution.
No, but I do have a question for you. So in those models, are they centrally controlled by one organization?
Yes, that's the big difference. They're centrally controlled, by essentially a software solution provider company. The implementation is probably distributed geographically to give it some redundancy, but the control is central, and they're not necessarily immutable. But I've never heard of a single case of somebody complaining that their data somebody tampered with their data in the background on one of those.
Okay, so they wouldn't even make it through the first funnel, because the first funnel is: are you relying on a trusted third party that's too expensive, inefficient, or ineffective? And you just gave us a use case that if they're not too expensive, they're not, they are effective and they're not inefficient. It's not really a good blockchain use case.
Yeah. Well, these folks are doing traceability and global logistics. But I find it interesting that, and I think that this whole blockchain movement is giving a lot of attention to inter-enterprise processes. So it's actually helping that marketplace in general.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts.
I think that's
Great,
interesting from a point of view of maybe there is some lessons learned here from how to share objects and processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they have to go through a lot of figuring all of that stuff out. Even things like security policies in industries like defense, they have to agree on identity proofing policies if you're going to bring someone on the network, and we're all going to agree that they need strong identity proofing, and different companies have different identity proofing policies. How do you agree on the identity proofing policy? So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for sharing. You didn't tell. Thank you for sharing. You didn't tell me which location you were in. Where are you calling?
Oh, sorry, I'm in Boston. Up in Boston.
Hello, Boston. Hello, Beantown. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
I hope to make it down there someday to say it.
Well, I hope you make it down here for March 29th.
Okay. Thanks.
Mary, can you, I've got a couple other folks that have some questions. Let me just bring John Howells up. Where did John go? There he is. Sorry, John. There you go, John. You're on.
Hi, John.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm great.
Good. You mentioned a number of standards organizations such as GS1, ISO, IEEE, but who do you see taking the lead in this area? Because sometimes, as you mentioned, the frustration with things not moving fast enough, standards can be a stumbling block if it ends up in the wrong organization from what I've seen in my past history, especially like EDI, for example, can be an interesting example.
Oh, John, that's not a minefield. Thank you for that question.
Hey, you're not here to answer the easy ones.
Mary's going to turn her camera off and leave now.
Yeah, now he's going to go off the air. Thanks, John. I'll just say this. So I looked. Most of them don't have standards out yet. I mean, so if you look, they have announcements. Like ISO, I think has probably the most number of blockchain initiatives. It's either 12 or 21. I forget which way my dyslexia is working today. But they have the most number of blockchain initiatives. But all the ones we're looking at haven't really, missed. They haven't published anything yet. So I don't know how to answer your question other than to say that that it's early days.
I gotta say the race is on. In other words.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the hard points is what is it that can be standardized in this environment?
Yeah. And they all have different projects. Some of them are looking at interoperability. Some of them are looking at particular industry verticals.
Interesting. I'm going to bring Matt on. Matt?
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
Matt.
Yep.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I have a question. The blockchain, do you see the opportunity for blockchain to support or interoperate with some of the other forward-looking technologies like artificial intelligence and IoT?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Bob Celeste, go to the next slide for a second.
Okay. This one it's got a lot of technology on it. So
yeah, this is the whole landscape one. Okay, so I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way. So what we see with, I have blockchain as the example up here, but it can apply to almost any technology. The first phase, when you have a new innovation that's technology driven, so we've done studies on robotic process automation, machine learning. I mean, augmented reality. You could put any technology in here. We always teach our, business executives, and we teach our MBA students that business strategy to drive your technology adoption, and that's true. But there's a first phase where you have to figure out what the technology does and what is it capable of. So for a long time, what's driving the conversation is the technology, not the business strategy and not the business focus. But that doesn't get you to completion and business value. But once you've learned what a technology does, then you're moving to, we have a business problem. What are the best technologies to help solve it? And that's where you're going to end up getting for all of these deployed applications. So let's just go back to the example of cold chain. That will involve IoT, right? You're going to have sensors that are connected to the internet. It's going to involve machine learning because they're going to have to do predictability on failure. It could or could not involve a blockchain application if you're trying to share data across a large ecosystem. So, we always teach that it's really we're aiming to solve business problems, and they can be enabled by a lot of different technologies, as well as a lot of different types of business and governance models.
Yeah, we've been working with IoT. We've been working on some projects as well, and as well as AI. And one of the things we found is, and this is an interesting twist as to what you were saying earlier, is that looking at the business value of all this, is that one of the things we're finding out is that blockchain is a way of basically creating more integrity in your data. And as you know, AI has been, I guess, in the last couple of years, I don't want to say floundering, but it's been losing a little bit of steam in terms of its credibility. And part of it, if you've worked with AI, you know that a lot of it is based on the quality of the data that you're working with. And one of the things we found now is that blockchain is actually a mechanism that could actually improve the integrity of the data that could support AI capabilities. And that makes AI more effective. And I think that this is where I think we'll see probably blockchain really providing a lot of added value to AI and IoT as well. And this is something that we've been working on. We're seeing this, these ideas play out as well. So I thought I'd throw that in.
All right, no, I want to follow up on your conversation. So we've got 3 books out on artificial intelligence. We don't use the term, we call it cognitive automation, but it's really a varied landscape. So we kind of divide everything up either into machine learning, which all machine learning means is it's an inference-based algorithm that produces a probabilistic outcome rather than what we're traditionally used to in if then else equals a deterministic outcome.
Right.
Machine learning algorithms work well under these conditions. You've got a lot of data and the data is structured. So we have a lot of other tools like trying to analyze conversations in human text. That is a data nightmare. You've got to have good training data, good labels, a massive amount of human labor goes into cleaning up the data in order to get these machine algorithms to even be mildly proficient. So going back to your point, if you'd say blockchain enables machine learning, I would move it forward to say no, data standardization, which is part of blockchains, is really what gives you the value for machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, in that sense. Yeah, blockchain is a way of, if you want machine learning into the picture, I understand what you're saying. But blockchain is a way of basically, it can be used in conjunction with machine learning to the data, integrity of the data. When you go through a data scrubbing exercise, you're looking for all kinds of reverse transactions and things that you're trying to put together stories as questioning the integrity of the data. And when you do AI, sometimes what happens is you're looking at your results and you're saying, well, wait a minute now, or even, machine learning. When you look at your results, you're saying, well, there's a lot of doubt here. And when you look at some of the results that you're getting, and what we found is that when you use blockchain algorithms, it eliminates a lot of the doubts that you're seeing in the AI. You don't have to spend time investigating those doubts.
Oh, okay. So the trust aspect. You trust the inputs to the machine learning algorithm.
Right. You have the blockchain now that's kind of making sure that transactions and data are being recorded in the ledger correctly. So now that makes the ledger a little bit more, in terms of, gives you a little bit more confidence in what you're seeing in the output of your AI. And so that's the point I wanted to make, and I wanted to see if you so.
I agree. Yes. Yeah. So the blockchain application requires structured data, and then once you have that, the blockchain itself inspires trust in that structured data, and then you can trust the outputs from a machine learning algorithm. So I think that's a coherent and a rational explanation of what those two technologies are capable of doing.
Good, thanks, Mary. Mary, I have one more question. I know we're at the top of our hour. We're kind of going over a little bit, but Jeff has a question, and it's kind of an interesting thing to ask you.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff, are you on?
Yes. Hold the phone. Wait. Oh God. Bless it. What the fuck? Yes.
Hi, Jeff. We can hear you.
Sorry. Yeah. Hi. My question was really about I saw the slide that you had after the hype cycle slide, the linear slide about the modern adoption of the technology, and the public versus, yeah, that's this one, yes. And it just seemed to me it was exactly the kinds of discussions that we had prior about cloud adoption. And the reason this is of interest to me is I'm representing the life sciences and healthcare industry, and we're very interested in this new and the utility of this new blockchain capability. But coming from a very conservative and regulated industry prior, we saw a real original fear about cloud adoption, particularly public cloud adoption, which pretty much manifests to their day. So the migration of our particular industry, in my opinion, was much slower and much more careful than, say, in retail or even banking, perhaps, that runs technologically farther afield or faster than really we, a more conservative industry, go. We're more of a technology laggard in general. So my question is there something to be learned from this comparison? Should we then go back and look at cloud adoption as possibly a model, an early model, as to what to expect from the adoption or the route of adoption that blockchain technology might take?
Yes, I think that was the whole point of the Gartner hype cycle, is that the technologies do tend overall to follow a trajectory. And I do like the Gartner hype cycle because I think it resonates with practitioners. We also talk about Rogers' innovation diffusion theory and the S curve and the phases of adoption there. So we do see that very generally. But as far as comparing them, as far as cloud computing, that would be more analogous to like an RPA or machine learning, because you as an organization can completely control your adoption. With blockchains, the internet, and inter-organizational innovations, it's a lot harder to do because you don't, as a sole institution, control it. By definition, it's an ecosystem application, or else you don't really need to have a blockchain if you're completely controlling it. So it is a different technology because it's an inter-organizational technology, which generally means you're going to go through any curve, whether it's Rogers or Gartner, slower, because you need to build the ecosystem in order to deliver it.
Can I, if I may just add one comment to that, to you? Thank you very much for that. We found last year, particularly in our emergent blockchain technology development, that this community adoption was very important, and quite frankly, we had underestimated that. So we had originally tried to apply blockchain to some of the life sciences and healthcare supply chain issues that we saw. We were actually a quiet but early adopter of this technology. But what we began to realize is that in certain very complex supply chains like pharmaceuticals, there were so many third-party logistics providers, and one of them wanted to maintain and protect their own data. They did not want to share, because by doing so would basically open themselves up to liability to others at the beginning or possibly the end of the chain, that it was almost impossible to come up with a business justification to get these intermediaries to adopt, to become part of that consortia, and therefore open up their metrics to the blockchain. Therefore, without that, it was almost impossible to move forward with a comprehensive end-to-end blockchain solution.
This is classic Clayton Christensen. So you're essentially trying to ask the trusted third party to put themselves out of business.
That's exactly correct. Exactly correct.
It's really, that classic Clayton Christensen. I did just because you asked about cloud, we actually wrote a couple books on cloud, but I'm going to share a funny story with you because I think we can draw something directly to blockchains. Back in 1999, my co-author, Leslie Wilcox from the London School of Economics, he and I have been working together for a quarter century. We started studying this new emerging model called application service provision. And it was the idea of getting software as a service rather than downloading it on your own servers and controlling it. We got so excited by this model. But almost all of the early providers in this space were startups, companies like Coria that you've never heard of because they've all gone away. And essentially what happened was the business model wasn't there, because these little companies they had to do so much hand holding for their customers that they couldn't make any revenue. And the early models were typically things like you could be a reseller for an ERP system for our low end customers, because we're only going to handhold the ones 500 million and above. And so they couldn't make a model of it. So we called it the book that got smaller every day. We wrote like 10 case studies. And every day, one of our little companies went out of business. So we walked away from application service provision. Well, guess what? That became cloud computing. But it came cloud computing with a different set of players, with a different value proposition and a different business model. We might see that same thing with blockchains. Right? This is early days. So when we say we're going to go through the trough of disillusionment and climb to the slope of enlightenment, it could be completely different players that bring us the actual applications. We don't know, because when you try to use your existing ecosystem partners, just as you noted, you have to bring your trusted third parties in here because they have the data. You know, are you going to be able to deliver? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I certainly appreciate and validate the struggles that you're having.
One quick question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to monopolize, but just while I have you, I'm drawn to some of these articles trying to speculate that there will be a quote blockchain of blockchains. And what that reminds me of is very, very early days, like back in the you know, basically the war of the browsers, if you will, that you used to have. This is way before Google, where you had the very early search engines, and then you had people developing meta search engines that were basically going out to all the search engines and aggregating. Do you think there might be such a evolution in terms of blockchain development?
There could be. I mean, if you look at some of the interoperability projects like the Cosmos or the Aeons, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is be the hub and spoke blockchain that can connect multiple blockchains. And it's all, you know, and that, so when we talk about interoperability, that's exactly what we may end up with. But I don't know, right? It's, but that there are people considering those kinds of designs.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think probably a good way to think about this is like the internet. You know, you have the lower level standards so that we can all use our different browsers and we can use our different computers and connect to it. And most of us are still talking about use case levels, you know, as far as interoperability. So we don't know where in the stack that we're going to end up, but we're seeing developments all through it.
Right. Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. We're kind of hitting at the top of our hour, so I just wanted to thank you for being on the program, and I'd love to have you back, especially as you start to publish some of the fundamental research, because I think that's really necessary in this kind of growth phase to really have people that are able to take a clean look at technologies and its application, and not to be just brochureware.
Well, Bob, I also want to thank you, because you serve a vital role. You're a nonprofit. You help build ecosystems, and you share what you learn with the world. So you are a critical enabler here, and I know everyone on this call appreciates all that you do. Thanks,
Mary. And everyone have a great weekend. Next week, actually, we talked a little bit about this, and this will be interesting, from the Accord project. Anton Vashlevich, he's the founder and CEO of Contract One, will be talking about from their technology work group. They have a number of work groups. We'll have someone else back to talk from a business perspective and be able to look at contracts and disputes and how they're looking at the connection between smart contracts or distributed applications and actual legal contracts. So thank everyone for being on the call. We will publish this presentation on our Open Mic Friday site, so you can come back to it. And if you have questions for Mary, we'll leave a link there so you can get in touch with her. Have a great weekend.